Hello, Black Justice family. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing so we can spread our important stories to more people. For our returning subscribers, thank you so much for your unwavering support. It truly means a lot to our community. Now, sit back and join us as we dive into today's powerful story. A young black boy walks into a high-end store, hoping to buy a gift for his father. His clothes are old, his shoes worn out, but his heart is full of love. The cashier? He doesn't see that. He only sees an easy target. But what he doesn't know? The boy's father is richer than he could ever imagine. Elijah Walker was just 8 years old, but he knew the value of hard work. His father, Jordan Walker, had built his empire from nothing, rising from the streets to become a self-made billionaire. But unlike other rich kids, Elijah wasn't spoiled. His father had taught him the importance of humility, respect, and kindness. So when Father's Day approached, Elijah wanted to do something special. He didn't want to ask for money. He wanted to buy a gift with his own savings money he had earned by helping neighbors, selling lemonade, and doing small chores. That's why he walked into Millington's, an upscale department store. He had no idea that his appearance would make him a target, and that before the day was over, someone would deeply regret underestimating him. Elijah stepped into Millington's with excitement bubbling inside him. He had never been in a store this fancy before. The floors were shiny marble, reflecting the bright chandeliers above. Shelves were stacked with luxurious watches, expensive colognes, and designer accessories. He clutched the small folded wad of bills in his pocket, the savings from the past 6 months. It wasn't a lot, but he hoped it would be enough. He just wanted to find the perfect gift for his father. But before he could even take a proper look around, he felt eyes on him. A sharp, judging stare, and when he turned, he saw him, Mark Dawson, the store's head cashier, a man who had spent years sizing people up, deciding who deserved respect and who didn't. And when Mark saw Elijah, he decided instantly, this boy didn't belong. Elijah took careful steps toward the glass display case. Inside, he saw a beautiful watch. His father loved watches. He had a collection, but Elijah wanted to buy one with his own money. He pressed his small fingers against the glass, eyes wide with admiration. But then, "Can I help you?" The voice was cold, laced with disdain. Elijah looked up. Mark stood behind the counter, arms crossed, eyebrows raised. Not in a friendly way. Not in a way that said, "How can I assist you?" But in a way that screamed, "Why are you even here?" Elijah hesitated, then smiled politely. "Yes, sir. I'd like to buy a watch for my dad." Mark snorted. "Oh, really?" His eyes traveled down Elijah's outfit. The faded hoodie, the scuffed sneakers, the worn-out jeans with a hole in the knee. "You sure you're in the right place, kid?" Mark smirked. "This isn't a thrift shop." Elijah's cheeks burned, but he stood his ground. "I have money," he said, his small hand gripping his pocket. Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "Right. Let me guess your allowance? Some loose change?" A few nearby customers glanced over. Some looked amused. Others? They simply ignored the scene. But Elijah wasn't backing down. "No," he said firmly. "I worked for it." Mark rolled his eyes. "Sure you did." Elijah felt the stares of the other shoppers. Whispers spread. "Look at him. What's he doing here?" "Probably lost." "Poor kid. Probably just wants to see how rich people live." Mark saw the way Elijah's shoulders tensed, and he enjoyed it. "All right, kid," he said loudly, making sure everyone around could hear. "Let's see what you've got." Elijah hesitated. "What?" Mark smirked, tapping the counter. "Go on, show me your money." Elijah's heart sank. He didn't want to pull out his savings in front of all these people. Not because he was ashamed, but because he knew what would happen. They would laugh. They would see that his few crumpled bills weren't enough for a place like this. But Mark? He was waiting. Elijah's hands trembled as he slowly pulled the small wad of cash from his pocket and set it on the counter. Mark took one look and burst out laughing. "That's it?" A few customers snickered. Elijah's face burned. He had worked so hard for that money. It meant everything to him. But to Mark, it was a joke. "Kid, do you even know where you are? The cheapest thing in this store costs more than your whole little stash." He shoved the money back toward Elijah. Maybe come back when you can actually afford something. Elijah's throat tightened, but he wouldn't cry. Not in front of these people. He picked up his money, shoving it back into his pocket. Then, he looked Mark dead in the eye. That wasn't nice, he said softly. Mark rolled his eyes. Listen, kid, the world isn't nice. You don't belong here. People like you. He gestured at Elijah's clothes. Should know their place. Elijah swallowed hard. He knew exactly what Mark meant. And for the first time in his young life, he felt it. That sharp sting of being judged, being seen as less. Mark expected him to leave. Expected him to run away, humiliated. But Elijah? He stood tall. And with a quiet, steady voice, he said, You're going to regret this. Mark laughed again. Oh yeah? And why's that? Elijah simply smiled. Because my dad is coming. Mark snorted. Oh no, should I be scared? Elijah just shrugged. You'll see. And as he turned to walk away, Mark had no idea that his life was about to change forever. Mark Dawson stood behind the counter, arms crossed, watching as the little boy walked toward the exit. Because my dad is coming. Elijah's words echoed in his head. But Mark wasn't worried. He had seen kids like this before, dreamers, nobodies, kids who didn't belong. And he was sure Elijah's dad was just another broke man who would walk in, apologize, and drag his son out of the store. He shook his head with a smirk and turned his attention back to the other customers. Next in line, he called out, dismissing the entire encounter. But what he didn't know, this was only the beginning. Mark continued ringing up customers, but something felt off. A few of his co-workers whispered behind the registers, stealing glances toward the entrance. Even the store manager, a stern-looking woman named Karen Mitchell, stepped out of her office, adjusting her blazer as she scanned the store. What's going on? Mark asked one of the other cashiers. The young woman, Lisa, hesitated. That kid, he's still outside. And, I think his dad just pulled up. Mark rolled his eyes. Oh no, what is he gonna do? Give me a lecture about being mean to his kid? He chuckled. But Lisa didn't laugh. Instead, her face looked pale. You might want to see for yourself, she muttered. Mark frowned and turned toward the glass doors. And then, his stomach dropped. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up right in front of the store. The kind of car only billionaires drive. The kind of car that doesn't just appear in random department store parking lots. The valet, who had been helping other customers, immediately ran forward, bowing slightly as he opened the door. And then, Jordan Walker stepped out. Tall, powerful, dressed in a custom-tailored suit that screamed money and influence. His face was unreadable, but his presence alone commanded respect. Mark felt his throat tighten. Customers near the entrance stepped back instinctively, sensing the shift in energy. Even the security guards who had been standing lazily by the entrance straightened their posture the moment they recognized him. This wasn't just a man. This was the Jordan Walker. Billionaire. Entrepreneur. And the father of the kid Mark had just humiliated. Before Mark could react, Elijah walked up to his father, completely at ease. Hey, Dad, he said, beaming. Jordan smiled down at his son, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Hey, champ, you find what you were looking for? Elijah shrugged. Not really. The cashier said I don't belong here. The store fell into dead silence. Karen, the store manager, looked like she was about to faint. Lisa covered her mouth in shock. Mark? Mark felt his legs go weak. Jordan Walker didn't raise his voice. He didn't cause a scene. But the way he walked into that store's low, calculated, with Elijah by his side, felt more powerful than any shouting match could ever be. He didn't even look at Mark yet. Instead, he turned to his son. So, tell me exactly what happened. Elijah nodded. I wanted to buy you a watch. I saved my money. But when I tried to ask for help, the man at the counter laughed at me. He told me I don't belong here and made fun of my clothes. Jordan's expression remained calm, but his eyes held fire. He finally turned his gaze to Mark. And in that moment, Mark wished he could disappear. The confrontation. Mark tried to backtrack immediately. Sir, Tu didn't mean anything by it. It was just a misunderstanding. Jordan held up a hand. I wasn't talking to you. Mark shut his mouth. Jordan looked at Karen, the store manager. Is this how your employees treat customers? Karen stammered. Mr. Walker, Tu had no idea. But now you do. His voice was quiet, controlled, but somehow scarier than if he had been yelling. He turned back to Elijah. Son, did you pick out a watch yet? Elijah shook his head. Jordan smiled. Then let's fix that. And with that, he walked straight past Mark toward the luxury watch section. Mark's realization. Mark stood frozen, his entire career flashing before his eyes. He had messed up. Badly. Lisa leaned in, whispering, You're so fired. Karen turned to Mark, her face red with rage. Get in my office, now. Mark gulped. This was the beginning of the end for him. Meanwhile, Jordan and Elijah walked through the store, employees scrambling to assist them with trembling hands. Jordan didn't even look at the price tags. He picked out the most expensive watch in the store. A limited edition platinum Rolex. 250 0. When the cashier, still shaking, rang up the total, Jordan pulled out a sleek black card. But before he paid, he turned back to Karen. Take his commission off the sale, he said, pointing at Mark. He gets nothing. Mark, who had been listening from the office door, felt his stomach drop. That commission would have been his biggest paycheck of the year. But now, he would walk away with nothing. As Jordan and Elijah exited the store, Elijah looked up at his father. I didn't need the most expensive watch, Dad. Jordan chuckled. I know, but I needed to prove a point. Elijah grinned. Did we? Jordan glanced back at the store, where Mark stood in the doorway, watching them with pure regret in his eyes. Oh, we definitely did. And as they drove away, Elijah knew one thing for sure. He might have been underestimated once, but never again. Mark sat in the manager's office, his hands sweating as he stared at the wall. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him like a boulder. He had humiliated a child. Not just any child, Elijah Walker. The son of one of the most powerful men in the country. And now, his entire future was at risk. Karen, the store manager, paced in front of him, her heels clicking against the floor. Do you have any idea what you just did? She hissed, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair. Mark swallowed hard. Tu didn't know who he was. Karen froze, then slowly turned to him, eyes burning. Oh, so it would have been okay if he were just a poor black kid, huh? Mark opened his mouth, but there was no way to explain himself. Because she was right. He hadn't just been rude. He had judged Elijah based on his appearance. He had assumed, without a second thought, that the boy wasn't worth his time. And now, he was paying the price. Karen exhaled sharply and sat down across from him, rubbing her temples. You know who Jordan Walker is, don't you? Mark nodded weakly. Then you know he could shut this place down with a phone call. That thought made his stomach churn. Millington's was one of the most prestigious department stores in the country. And Jordan Walker? He had connections, political power, influence, money. If he decided this store needed to be taught a lesson, he could ensure Millington's never recovered. Mark felt his pulse spike. Do you think I'm going to get fired? Karen gave him a long, disappointed look. What do you think, Mark? His heart dropped. Meanwhile, the VIP treatment for Elijah. While Mark sat in the office, feeling his career slipping away, Elijah was experiencing the exact opposite. Jordan had made it clear his son was going to receive the best customer experience of his life. The store's general manager, who had rushed over the moment he heard Jordan Walker was inside, was personally assisting Elijah. You can choose anything you like, sir, the man said. His voice overly polite. Elijah glanced up at his dad. Anything? Jordan smirked. Anything. Elijah turned back to the shelves, scanning the luxury watches. He wasn't interested in the price tag, she was looking for something special. Finally, his eyes landed on a sleek black and gold Rolex. It was elegant, classy, the kind of watch his dad would actually love. This one, he said confidently. The manager nodded eagerly. Excellent choice, sir. Elijah beamed, watching as the watch was carefully packaged in a velvet box and placed in an elegant shopping bag. For the first time that day, he felt like he truly belonged. And he realized something. He always had. It was just people like Mark who had tried to convince him otherwise. Back in the office, Mark was desperate. He could already see his future crumbling. Karen, please, give me another chance. I swear I'll do better. Karen's expression was stone cold. I don't think you understand, Mark. This isn't just about you being rude to a customer. This is about what it represents. She folded her arms. Do you have any idea how many times this happens? How many kids like Elijah get treated like they don't belong just because of how they look? Mark looked down, unable to answer. Because he knew the answer. Too many. Karen sighed. The damage is done. Jordan Walker isn't the type to let things slide. I don't even know if I'll still have my job tomorrow. Mark felt sick. There has to be something I can do. Karen stared at him for a long moment. Then, her expression softened just slightly. There's one thing. Mark sat up straighter. Anything. She tapped her manicured nails on the desk. Go apologize, right now. Mark hesitated. Apologizing wasn't exactly his strong suit. But what choice did he have? He took a deep breath, wiped the sweat from his palms, and nodded. Okay. The apology. But is it too late? Elijah and Jordan were just about to leave when Mark hurried toward them, his face red with embarrassment. Customers and employees watched closely. This wasn't just a conversation, this was a moment of reckoning. Mark cleared his throat. Excuse me, Mr. Walker, and Elijah. Jordan turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Elijah simply raised an eyebrow. Mark swallowed hard. I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. Jordan said nothing. Elijah tilted his head. Sorry for what? Mark hesitated. This was his moment. Either he said the right thing or he was done. He took a deep breath. I was wrong to judge you. I assumed things about you without even knowing who you were. And that was unfair. Not because your dad is rich, but because no one deserves to be treated that way. A long silence followed. Then, Elijah smiled. Okay. Mark blinked. Okay? Elijah shrugged. Yeah. Everyone makes mistakes. Just don't do it again. Mark let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. Jordan studied him for a long moment. Then, he gave a small nod. That's the only reason you still have a job. Mark froze. Wait. I do? Karen, who had been standing nearby, smirked. Barely. Jordan turned back to Elijah. You ready, kid? Elijah nodded, gripping his shopping bag. Yeah. Let's go home. And as they walked out of the store, heads held high, Mark knew one thing for sure. He would never judge someone by their appearance again. Because today, he had learned a lesson he would never forget. Mark watched as Jordan and Elijah walked out of the store, the weight of what had just happened pressing heavily on his chest. The store was silent. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had watched him get humbled in the most public way possible. He had walked into work that day thinking he was in control, thinking he could judge who mattered and who didn't. But now, he realized how wrong he had been. Mark turned to find Karen, the store manager, standing with her arms crossed. Her eyes were sharp, filled with pure disappointment. I should fire you, she said simply. Mark tensed, his stomach tightening at her words. But Mr. Walker gave you a second chance, so for now, you're staying. Relief flooded him, but it didn't last long. However, Karen continued, stepping closer, if I ever catch you treating another customer like that again. She leaned in, her voice dropping. You're done. No warnings, no discussions, just gone. Mark nodded quickly. It won't happen again, he said. His voice sincere for the first time that day. Karen held his gaze for a moment longer, then sighed. It better not. And with that, she walked away. Mark stood frozen, the embarrassment still burning in his chest. But underneath that, something else. Regret. And maybe just maybe, a desire to change. Meanwhile, Elijah sat in the back seat of the Rolls-Royce, the shopping bag resting on his lap. The weight of the expensive watch inside felt different than he expected. He had wanted to buy his father a gift. He had never expected to teach someone else a lesson. His dad glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "What's on your mind, champ?" Elijah hesitated. "I don't get it, Dad. That guy treated me like garbage. Why did you let him keep his job?" Jordan smiled slightly, turning the wheel as they pulled onto the highway. "Because sometimes, son, people need a wake-up call more than they need punishment." Elijah thought about that. "You think he'll really change?" Jordan's smile faded. "That's up to him." Elijah nodded, glancing down at the watch again. For the first time, he realized this whole experience had given him something even more valuable than a Father's Day gift. It had given him a new perspective, because he had learned something important that day, that people will always judge you based on how you look. But the trick was proving them wrong. And with that, he leaned back, smiling to himself. Because he knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. Days passed, but the events at Millington's remained fresh in everyone's mind. For Mark, it was a painful wake-up call. For Elijah, it was an unforgettable lesson. And for Jordan Walker, it was a reminder that the world still had a long way to go. But he had raised his son right, and that meant everything. Mark wasn't the same after that day. For the first time, he saw his job differently. It wasn't just about scanning items and dealing with customers. It was about how he treated people. A week later, a young girl walked into the store. Her clothes weren't expensive. Her sneakers were scuffed, and she looked nervous. Mark felt an instinct rise in him, the same instinct that had made him judge Elijah. But this time, he stopped himself. Instead, he walked over, smiled, and said, "Hey there, need help finding something?" The girl hesitated, then smiled back. And in that moment, Mark knew he had changed. A few weeks later, Elijah sat on the patio with his father, watching the sunset. "Dad?" he asked, twirling his new watch around his wrist. "Yeah?" Jordan replied, sipping his coffee. "I want to do something that helps kids like me." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Elijah thought for a moment. "A foundation. Something that helps kids learn about confidence, respect, and standing up for themselves." Jordan's smile was slow but proud. "That's a big idea, son." Elijah nodded. "Yeah, but I think I can do it." Jordan laughed. "I know you can." And just like that, a new idea was born. One that would change lives. Because Elijah Walker wasn't just the son of a billionaire. He was becoming something greater. A leader. A voice for those who had none. And most importantly, a reminder that no one should ever be underestimated. Judging someone by their appearance is the biggest mistake you can make. Respect costs nothing but changes everything. Subscribe for more stories that prove kindness always wins.